Have you ever looked at your bank balance and felt a cold wave rise from your stomach to your throat? Like the numbers on the screen were laughing at you for even daring to hope? Have you ever stood in a fluorescent-lit grocery aisle doing math on your phone, subtracting coupons and swapping brands and putting back a box of cereal because rent doesn't care that your kid loves the honey kind? If you've tasted that mixture of shame and stubbornness, if you've ever whispered, "We're okay," to a sleepy child while wondering how you'll stretch $20 into 5 days, then you already know something about me. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a fistfight in slow motion. And if you stay with me to the end, I'll show you how a woman they wrote off, single, exhausted, deep in debt, walked into a closing office, picked up a ring of keys, and changed the story for good. They said I'd never escape debt. And for a long time I believed them because the evidence was stacked like sandbags against my door. A hospital bill from the night my daughter was born. 2 credit cards that grew teeth the second I missed a payment. A car that coughed like a smoker and still demanded gas and insurance. And rent that climbed a little higher every time the lease renewed. That's just life, people shrugged. But their lives seemed to come with safety nets. And mine was a frayed rope bridge over a canyon. Nights blurred into lists. Amounts due, due dates, overdraft fees, minimum payment due in bold red letters like a dare. I would sit on the kitchen floor after my daughter fell asleep and spread envelopes around me like a tarot spread of worst-case scenarios, and every card I turned said the same thing. Trapped. The night I decided to fight didn't arrive with trumpets. It crawled in on quiet feet. The heater rattled, the fridge hummed, and the apartment smelled faintly of bleach and spaghetti sauce. I was kneeling by the coffee table, turning a past-due notice over and over like it might transform if I stared hard enough, when I caught my reflection in the dark TV screen. Eyes swollen from crying, hair tied in a careless knot, shoulders slumped like a tent after rain. My daughter stirred in the bedroom and murmured my name, soft and trusting, and something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, a precise one, like a lock shifting. I grabbed a spiral notebook from the drawer, sat down, and wrote the ugliest sentence I knew. I owe. Then I listed everything. No rounding, no pretending. Seeing the total didn't kill me. It introduced me to myself. Writing turned the monster into measurements. I could hate numbers or I could use them, and hatred never paid a bill for me. I built 3 columns: debt, minimum, interest, and stared until the page stopped swimming. The smallest balance looked pathetic compared to the big ones, but it was also the only thing that seemed killable. That night, I circled it like prey. I opened a new page and carved out a budget so lean it might have cut my fingers if I touched it wrong. Rent, food, lights, bus pass, diapers, absolutely nothing else. I canceled streaming, paused the gym I barely visited, unplugged every outlet that didn't earn its keep. I texted friends that I loved them, but I'd be scarce. I set alarms. One for pay the little one for check the meter, one for breathe. People think the first cut is the hardest. It isn't. The 4th is, the 5th, the 20th. It's saying no again when your child asks for pizza on a Friday, and you have to make it a game, chef night, so she doesn't see the worry behind your smile. It's walking past the clearance rack because a $7 cardigan is actually 3 days of bus fare. It's opening the fridge and deciding you're not hungry after all, because there are exactly 2 yogurts left and small bones are still growing in this household. It's watching friends post photos from restaurants with napkins folded into swans while you're comparing unit prices on beans. The work wasn't glamorous, but every no rearranged the map inside me, moving me inch by inch from helpless to deliberate. I treated that smallest card like a rival who'd talked about my family. Every extra dollar I found became a jab, every side task a hook. I sold a stroller we'd outgrown. I babysat on Saturday nights while other people got ready in mirrors. I learned to take pictures of items and write descriptions that sounded cheerful instead of desperate. The night I clicked, submit payment, and watched that balance fall to zero, it felt like inhaling after being held underwater. I didn't buy a cupcake to celebrate. I printed the confirmation email and taped it inside the notebook. Proof that the monster bleeds. Momentum is a drug they don't warn you about in school. With the first card gone, I rolled its payment into the next, and the notebook got heavier with check marks until it felt like a shield. My boss thought I was distracted at work. He wasn't wrong. I was building a machine in my head. Money in, money out, leak sealed, valve tightened, pressure released. At night, after my daughter fell asleep to the low murmur of the old fan, I taught myself how interest actually works, why minimum payments are quicksand, and how skipping one budget meeting with yourself can undo a month of effort. I began to understand that debt thrives on your silence. The moment you start speaking its language, it loses its accent of inevitability. There were setbacks that clawed at my throat. The car needed new brakes. The school sent home a list the length of a legal pad for supplies. My hours were cut for a month when a client pulled a contract. I watched the emergency fund, thin as a whisper, drain, and learned a terrible, beautiful truth. Resilience isn't the absence of disaster. It's what remains when the disaster stops talking. I rebuilt the fund, dollar by stubborn dollar, and swore I would never again confuse luck with stability. When someone said, "You're so lucky you found overtime," I smiled and thought, lucky is what persistence looks like when it's dressed for Instagram. My daughter became my accomplice without ever being asked. She turned lights off with theatrical flourishes, announced budget queen rules when we grocery shopped, and saved coins in a glass jar that chimed like church bells when we added to it. We made soup Sundays and freezer Fridays, and learned 50 ways to transform leftovers into something that tasted like a decision instead of a loss. When she wanted glitter shoes, we drew them. When I wanted quiet, we took walks and counted dogs. I kept the fear of scarcity out of her mouth, but I did let discipline sit at our table. I wanted her to grow up knowing the difference between stinginess and strategy. One is fear of not having, the other is the courage to choose. Around the end of year 2, a coworker scoffed when someone mentioned investing. "That's for people with money," he said, and chuckled like the punchline was me. I felt the old shame flare, then fade. On my lunch break, I read an article about compound interest, then another, then 5 more. The math looked like witchcraft until I realized it was simply time plus intention multiplied by not touching the account every time life got cranky. I didn't run to open anything. Debt still had the steering wheel. But I drew a line on paper and wrote, "After the last card is gone, automatic, small, boring, relentless." If wealth had a personality, I decided, it would be a quiet woman who minds her business and sets her transfers on the first of the month. The last credit card fell on a rainy Tuesday that made the city look like it had been washed and left to dry. I paid it at my desk on a break, watched the screen flicker, and felt calm. That surprised me. I had expected fireworks. Instead, I got something better, silence that didn't accuse me. I walked home through puddles with a loaf of bread under my arm like a cliché, and when my daughter asked, "Is the monster gone?" I knelt to her level and said, "This one is. There will be other monsters, but we know how to fight now." We ate grilled cheese and tomato soup, and I didn't take a picture of the confirmation screen, because I didn't need proof anymore. I had new habits, the kind that don't perform for applause. Freedom is not the same as security, and I learned that the moment I looked around our apartment and realized that Rent, my oldest bully, still ran the neighborhood. The landlord raised it again at renewal like he was tipping his hat, and I stared at the new number until a different sentence wrote itself behind my eyes. I want a home, not the fantasy HGTV kind. Something small with a door I own, walls we can tape drawings to without negotiating, a yard where weeds and wildflowers can argue without a committee meeting. The word mortgage felt like a mountain, but rent was a river flooding every spring. Pick your risk, I told myself. Pick it on purpose. I built a new plan. The first draft was dramatic. The second was doable. I set up automatic transfers to a separate savings account that lived at a bank I didn't drive past. I named it Roof, so that moving money out felt like standing in the rain. I learned acronyms I'd never cared about, DTI, LTV, PMI, and discovered that gatekeepers invent languages to make you believe you need permission. I checked my credit once a month instead of compulsively, and watched it climb like a careful vine. I cut deeper than before. We swapped brand names for store brands, sliced subscriptions down to a single free trial shared among friends, and turned birthdays into choose a day together, instead of unwrap something you'll forget in a week. Frugality stopped feeling like deprivation and started feeling like training. House hunting humbled me. Online listings flirted in flattering light, but reality had sagging floors and mysteries behind drywall. I walked through living rooms that smelled like someone's old arguments and kitchens that seemed to sigh, "You're not ready." Realtors spoke quickly, lenders spoke vaguely, and one loan officer tilted his head and asked if I had a partner who might co-sign in the same tone people use when they ask if you've considered bangs. I smiled with all my teeth and said, "No, but I have records," and slid a folder across the desk like a plot twist. Budgets, pay stubs, savings history, letters of explanation so thorough they might have been short stories. He blinked and stapled something. Gatekeepers love staples. The house I chose didn't sparkle. It sat under a sky that had learned patience, with white siding that needed a weekend and a brush, windows that blinked crookedly at the street, and a shy little porch that looked like it might tell secrets at dusk. The yard wasn't big enough for soccer, but it could host Clover and a plastic kiddie pool without apology. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen that promised "we'll improvise," and a living room that could hold both exhaustion and laughter without choosing sides. My daughter ran to the back door like it owed her something and yelled, "We can plant sunflowers here." I stood in the middle of the empty room, felt the floor answer under my feet, and knew, not perfect, ours. Approval arrived like a cautious bird. "Congratulations," the woman on the phone said, as if she were afraid to startle me, and I thanked her twice because the first thanks was for the present, and the second was for every version of me that kept going. I hung up and sat on the edge of the tub, the one with the chip shaped like a comma, as if the house itself were saying, "There's more," and cried the kind of tears that taste like salt and relief. My daughter found me there and thought I was hurt. "No, baby," I laughed, wiping my face with a towel that had lost its fluff years ago. "We get to paint your room purple." The weeks before closing were a marathon run at a sprinter's pace, documents multiplied like rabbits. I chased down letters, unearthed W-2s from the bottom of drawers, argued with a printer that ate paper like a toddler eating crackers, and learned that underwriting is just a long, elaborate way of asking, "Are you who you say you are?" doubtfully. At night, I lay awake and let fear tell its bedtime stories. They'll find something wrong. You misunderstood a form. You'll get to the last page and the pen will run dry. I learned to answer fear with facts: savings, present, debt, gone, emergency fund, intact, income, steady, track record, carved in notebooks and paid invoices. Go to sleep, I told myself. You've done your part. Tomorrow will introduce itself. Closing day felt like walking through a heavy door into warmer air. The conference room smelled faintly of toner and lemon cleaner. The attorney's tie had tiny sailboats on it like a private joke. Papers stacked in tidy towers. My hand shook on the first signature and steadied by the 10th, each stroke of ink less like begging and more like authoring. No one at the table knew the price of those signatures. They saw a buyer. I saw a woman who had wrestled time, habits, and hunger, and decided not to lose. When the keys slid across the table, silver and ordinary and blinding, I curled my fingers around them until they pressed small crescents into my palm. Later, I would trace those marks and think, That's what the beginning of ownership feels like. Indentations you asked for. We drove to the house with the windows cracked because the day was unseasonably kind. The neighborhood grocery had a sign out front advertising peaches. A kid on a bike wove around a mailbox with the reckless confidence of someone whose worries fit in a backpack. My daughter kept up a running commentary in the back seat, a blend of earnest plans and 9-year-old logic. Where the dog will sleep? We still didn't have a dog. Where the fairy lights will go? How we'll host hot chocolate nights for the neighbors we hadn't met. When we turned onto our street, I slowed down the way people slow down in front of places they're trying to memorize. We sat for a breath, engine ticking, looking. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready," she said. And I believed her. The first step over the threshold stole my balance, not physically, but in that quiet interior way where your body realizes the landscape has changed. The light inside had a different color than the apartment light, like it had been filtered through optimism. The floors creaked a little, announcing us. I touched the wall and felt a surprising coolness, as if the house had been holding its breath for this touch. We dropped our bags and walked through every room, narrating what could go where, what could be patched, what would become tradition. The bathroom mirror leaned slightly, amused. The kitchen window caught the late afternoon and threw it across the counter like a shawl. I heard my own laugh and recognized it. Not brittle, not borrowed. Mine. We slept on the floor because our furniture was a map that hadn't caught up yet. Pizza on paper plates, juice in mugs, a celebratory extravagance that cost less than a movie ticket but tasted like arrival. My daughter fell asleep mid-sentence, hand wrapped around her stuffed bear, mouth open in a warrior's rest. I lay awake staring at a ceiling that didn't apologize for itself, and the silence was a companion instead of a threat. I thought about every no that had planted this yes, every coupon, every side gig, every time I counted change at midnight and refused to call it defeat. The house answered back with the tiny sounds all houses make when they are getting used to your breathing, and I smiled because it already knew our names. We made it a home one weekend at a time. Paint under our fingernails, a purple galaxy on one bedroom wall, curtains that we ironed with a hair straightener because the old iron finally quit in protest, a thrifted lamp that looked expensive at dusk. We planted seeds that might turn out to be flowers or rebellious weeds. Either way, they were ours. I fixed a cabinet hinge with a YouTube video and stubbornness. My daughter wrote "Welcome, Future Us" inside a closet in pencil, and I didn't tell her not to. Ownership changed my posture. I no longer folded myself small to fit around someone else's rules. We took up space gently and without apology, the way sunlight takes a floor. People began to ask how. The same mouths that once shaped the words, "That's not realistic," now formed, "Can you show me?" I didn't turn into a guru. Gurus make money with declarations. I offered a map made of sentences and choices. "Start with the truth on paper," I said. "Kill the smallest debt to prove you can aim. Build a tiny emergency fund so emergencies stop renting space in your head. Save where no one can talk you into backtracking. Learn the language of loans so you can hear the lies. Remember that sacrifice tastes better when you season it with purpose. Don't chase someone else's timeline. And celebrate the boring wins, especially the boring ones. Boring is how freedom pays its mortgage." Sometimes I sit on the porch after my daughter goes to bed and let evening stitch the day closed. The neighborhood hums. Lawnmower a block over, a television laugh track, a dog negotiating with a squirrel. And I think about the apartment nights when I believed my life was going to be one long rerun of Not Enough. I don't judge that version of me. She kept us alive. She learned to make soup without a recipe and dignity without applause. She is the reason I can sit here now with a book I might not finish because there's no quiz tomorrow about survival. If I could speak to her, I'd say, keep the notebook. The notebook becomes a door. Here's what I want you to carry from this. Being underestimated is usable energy. They counted me out, and I converted countouts into fuel. I wasn't rescued. There was no secret windfall, No hidden benefactor. No viral hack. There were lists and late nights and laughter we refused to surrender. There were setbacks that tried to audition for permanence and were shown the door. There were 1,000 unphotographed decisions that led to one photograph of keys in a palm. If you are at your kitchen table tonight with bills spread like a storm map, you're not failing. You're plotting. Sharpie that truth somewhere you'll see when the lights feel too bright. Money is not moral. It is a tool. In the wrong stories, it becomes a weapon, but in the right hands, it turns into shelter, time, calm. I used to think wealth meant caviar problems and yacht metaphors. Now I know it also means I can fix the brake pads without choosing between groceries and gas. My child can be sick without me bargaining with the urgent care copay. We can tape art to walls, and the only permission we need is a level and a nail. Freedom didn't make me louder. It made me kinder. I tip better. I sleep deeper. I say yes with intention and no without apology. If you need a starting line, borrow mine. Sit down tonight with a notebook that doesn't care about your past and write the numbers that scare you. Circle the one you can attack first, not because it's noble, but because it's next. Turn your phone into a teammate. Alarms, transfers, notes titled "For the Roof." Ask for extra shifts if your health allows. Ask for the raise with receipts of your value. Ask your pride to sit quietly while you sell what no longer serves you. Learn a little about investing, not because someone on the internet shouted at you, but because you deserve to let time work for you for once. And if someone tells you, that's for people with money, smile and think, it will be. One evening, months after we moved in, my daughter and I lay on the living room floor and traced shapes in the ceiling texture like we were reading constellations. "What does it feel like?" she asked out of nowhere. "What does what feel like?" I said, half asleep. "Winning." I looked at the window where the last of the light lingered and said the truest thing I knew. It feels quiet. Not flashy, not triumphant trumpets, not a parade. Quiet like a room where you can finally hear yourself think. Quiet like a stomach that isn't clenching. Quiet like the click of a lock you paid for with time, courage, and the unglamorous art of keeping promises to yourself. If you're still with me, thank you. You didn't come for a miracle. You came for a method wrapped in a story. Take what helps and leave the rest on this porch with me. And if tonight finds you back under fluorescent lights comparing unit prices and counting coupons and balancing a cart with one hand and a toddler with the other, hear my voice over the hum of the freezer section. You are not silly for trying, you are not late, and you are not alone. Keep going. One day you'll turn a key and think, we did it, and the house will answer back with a small, proud creak that sounds exactly like your name.